Imagine this. You're standing on a field in Boeotia. It's July 6th, 371 BC, and the sun is just relentless. The air is heavy, thick,
Oppressive heat.
oppressive. And if you're a Greek hoplite, you are already miserable. I mean, you're baking inside, what, 70 pounds of bronze and leather?
At least it's an oven.
But that feeling, that physical misery, it's nothing.
Yeah.
It's absolutely nothing compared to the dread of what you see advancing towards you. Because you're part of the Theban coalition. You've got maybe 6,000 men, and you are fighting for, well, for everything, for survival.
And across that field.
And across that field, you see them. Sparta. For 300 years, that name has meant one thing and one thing only.
Invincibility.
Military invincibility. They are the undisputed power in Greece. Everyone knows that when the Spartan phalanx advances, the game is, for all intents and purposes, over.
It's a foregone conclusion.
Yet here we are, we're standing right at the precipice of this impossible moment. We are about to watch the complete catastrophic collapse of a system that defined warfare for 3 centuries. And it all shatters in the space of a single, brutal afternoon.
And this moment, the Battle of Leuctra, it's more than just a battle. It's a profound historical mystery. How does a civilization that literally engineered its entire existence, every law, every custom, to produce the perfect, undefeated warrior, how do they lose everything in one engagement?
It wasn't slow decline.
No, not at all. This wasn't the slow rot of an empire. This was an instant, total system failure, delivered by a single, brilliant, strategic innovation. So that's what we're here to uncover, the how and the why.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. We're pulling from historical analyses that really focus on the tactics, the psychology of the commanders, Epaminondas for Thebes, King Cleombrotus for Sparta, and the deep societal shockwaves that followed Leuctra. We need to understand what made the Spartan machine tick.
What its fatal flaw was.
And how one man saw that flaw and exploited it so completely that he didn't just defeat an army, he functionally erased a civilization.
Let's get into it.
Okay, so let's start with that Spartan machine itself. When we look at their society, this isn't something that just evolved by chance. It feels like a deliberate, civilization-wide experiment.
It absolutely was.
Yeah.
It was social engineering on a scale that's hard for us to even comprehend. The goal was singular: the creation of the perfect warrior.
Everything else was secondary.
Secondary or actively forbidden. You have to understand that Sparta saw itself as a permanent garrison state, surrounded by a hostile population of slaves, the helots. So everything we might value, art for art's sake, philosophy, trade, accumulating personal wealth, all of that was seen as a distraction,
A weakness.
a corrupting influence. The singular goal of the state was to produce homoioi. It means the similars or the equals. Perfect equals in discipline, in courage, and in their commitment to the state.
And the mechanism for creating these similars was the agauge. And our sources describe this. It's not a school. It's not a training camp. It's a system of state-sponsored, institutionalized brutality. And it starts almost before a child can walk.
It starts at birth.
Yeah.
Literally. Male infants were inspected by the elders. If a baby was deemed weak or sickly or deformed in any way, they were discarded, left on a hillside to die.
Thrown away. The state decided who lived and who died based on their future military potential.
Exactly. And the survivors at age 7 were taken from their mothers and entered the agauge. They were organized into platoons, trained by older boys, and lived in a permanent state of deprivation. It was conditioning.
And we're talking about forced hunger, right? This wasn't just, healthy rationing.
No, this was deliberate starvation. It was psychological conditioning through scarcity. The boys were given one cloak to wear year-round, even in the freezing winters of Laconia. They were given deliberately insufficient rations.
Why? What was the goal of it?
To force them to be resourceful. They were expected to supplement their diet by stealing. But, and this is the critical part, if you were caught stealing, you weren't punished for the theft itself.
You were punished for being caught.
For the incompetence.
Yeah.
For the lack of cunning. So the system is simultaneously teaching absolute obedience to the group, but also individual stealth, cunning, and the ruthlessness needed to survive. Skills that are essential for a soldier on campaign.
That seems like a paradox, though. You're encouraging this individual initiative, this cunning, but at the same time demanding this total rigid obedience to the unit.
It's a very delicate balance. They needed individual toughness, but that toughness was always subordinate to the needs of the phalanx. And there was a darker side to it too, cryptia.
What was that?
It was a sort of final test, you might say. The most promising young men were sent out into the countryside with nothing but a knife. They had to survive by their wits. And our sources suggest their primary mission was to terrorize the Helot population, to assassinate any Helot who showed signs of leadership or rebellion under the cover of darkness.
So it wasn't just training, it was institutionalizing violence. It was making obedience to the state's brutal needs second nature.
By the time a Spartan man joined the Phalanx in his early 20s, the individual, as we'd understand it, was essentially gone. All that remained was a weapon, programmed for discipline, programmed for commitment. Surrender was the ultimate shame. It was worse than any conceivable death.
And that mindset, it gave them this huge psychological edge on the battlefield.
A profound advantage. While other Greek armies might rely on morale or patriotism or the charisma of a leader, Spartan armies relied on certainty. They knew their men would not break. They would march farther, they would fight longer, and they would absorb more casualties because the social cost of retreat was total exile. Their discipline wasn't just training, it was their armor.
But the warrior, no matter how perfect, was still just one part of the machine. The true genius of Sparta, the reason they were unbeatable for so long, was the phalanx itself, the mechanics of it.
The phalanx was the ultimate expression of teamwork as military technology.
Huh.
Every man has his spear, sure, but the key was the hoplon, the large concave shield.
Held in the left hand.
And that's crucial because it's held in the left hand, it protects your own left side, but it overlaps to cover the exposed right side of the man next to you. So when they locked shields, the phalanx became this one solid, overlapping wall of bronze and wood.
A human tank.
A perfect description. It's a human tank, capable of absorbing a tremendous amount of shock while delivering this synchronized rhythmic pushing force.
And every other Greek commander knew what was coming. They knew the signature move, the unbeatable tactic, the right flank hammer blow. This wasn't a secret. It was a known, predictable checkmate that no one could solve.
And it was a tactic derived from basic human nature. Let's just think about the physics of it for a second. Your shield is on your left. That means your right side, your sword arm, your spear arm is exposed.
So you're vulnerable on that side.
You're vulnerable. So when two phalanxes engage, there's a natural subconscious psychological pressure for every single man in that line to drift slightly to his right. He's trying to get a little bit more under the cover of his neighbor's shield.
And when everyone in a line of 1,000 men does that.
The entire line creeps rightward. It was a phenomenon in almost all hoplite battles. A slow, grinding drift to the right.
And Sparta, they took this universal human tendency, this flaw, and they weaponized it.
Absolutely. They always, without fail, deployed their elite troops, the Hippes, the Royal Guard on the extreme right flank. Because of that natural drift, the Spartan right flank would inevitably, mathematically, overlap the enemy's left flank.
And once you have that overlap,
the game is over. The elite flank would wheel inward, crushing the enemy's unprotected side and rear. It was a hammer blow delivered with what felt like mathematical precision. The enemy line would just unravel from the left.
It sounds like this slow-motion, inevitable disaster for whoever was facing them. They weren't just winning battles, they were exploiting a design flaw in how humans fight in formation.
It was a simple, brutal, and unbeatable formula. Superior men with superior discipline, placed in the position that naturally gains the tactical advantage every single time. And commanders across Greece, they tried everything to counter it.
Like what? What did they try?
Well, the obvious thing is to reinforce your own left flank. Put your best troop there to hold off the Spartan elites.
But that didn't work.
It never worked. Because you'd be thinning out the rest of your line. And the Spartans' superior discipline meant their center would just push through your weakened center. Others tried attacking the Spartan center, hoping to break them before the flank collapsed.
And again.
Again, it failed. The Spartans simply wouldn't yield. Their push was harder. Their will was stronger. The machine was too well oiled. It had endured for 300 years.
But hold on. If everyone knew about this drift, if it was just a known physics problem for 3 centuries, why didn't every other Greek army simply train harder to resist it? Was it really just about conditioning?
That's a fantastic question. And they did try. They drilled their men to hold the line. But the Spartan advantage wasn't just conditioning. It was their total cultural focus. Other city-states, they had commerce, they had philosophy, they had democracy, all things that required debate, flexibility, new ideas.
Distractions, as Sparta saw them.
Precisely. Sparta was intellectually rigid.
Yeah.
They had one single perfected application, the phalanx. They didn't debate the phalanx, they were the phalanx. And this monolithic focus meant their execution was always faster, more committed, and more brutal than anyone else's. Their system was so perfect. For so long, they became convinced that their way was the only way war could be waged.
And that certainty, that rigidity.
That is the flaw. That is exactly what Epaminondas saw.
Okay, so let's shift focus. Let's go to the other side of the field and talk about the man who saw that flaw. Epaminondas, the Theban general. We need to set the scene for Thebes. They were facing just impossible odds, and their motivation was really steeped in recent humiliation.
To understand the Theban mindset, you have to look at the decade right before Leuctra. Sparta won the Peloponnesian War. They are the undisputed top dog, the hegemon of Greece, and they enforced that dominance with brutal efficiency.
They weren't benevolent leaders.
Far from it. Yeah. And the ultimate humiliation for Thebes came in 382 BC. A Spartan force was marching north, supposedly on other business, and during a time of peace, they used treachery to seize the Theban Acropolis, the Cadmea.
So they didn't conquer it in a battle, they just took it.
They took it. It was an act of total political violation against a supposed ally. They installed a puppet oligarchy loyal to Sparta and occupied the city for 4 years.
And the Thebans eventually kicked them out.
They did, through a very daring, very bloody coup led by exiles, a real cloak and dagger operation. But they knew the second they retook their city that the clock was ticking. Sparta would never, ever tolerate that kind of defiance.
So this army that's marching on them now, this is the response. Sparta is coming to put Thebes back in its box, permanently.
And that brings us back to those battlefield numbers. Thebes has, what, maybe 6,000, 7,000 men? Many of them are hesitant allies from the Boeotian League who really don't want to be there.
And Sparta has 10,000, including the core of 700 full Spartiates, the homoioi. The odds are terrifying. Most of the Theban coalition partners were actively looking for an excuse to leave.
The logical choice was to retreat behind the city walls. But Epaminondas understood that retreat meant eternal subjugation. He decided that the only way to truly save Thebes was to fight and win an open battle, which was, by any rational measure, suicidal.
And this is where we need to understand Epaminondas himself. He wasn't a product of a system like the Agoge. He was different. He was a thinker.
He was. And that cultural difference is everything. Epaminondas was a student of the Pythagorean school of philosophy. He was known for being thoughtful, meditative, for applying abstract logical thinking to real-world problems. While the Spartans learned to obey the fixed patterns of warfare, Epaminondas learned to question the underlying structure of reality itself.
So when he looked at the invincible Spartan machine, he wasn't looking at it like another general, trying to copy it or find a minor tweak to counter it.
Exactly. He looked at it like a philosopher searching for the internal contradiction. He saw the weakness hidden inside their perfection.
Which was what?
He realized that 300 years of success hadn't just bred confidence, it had bred predictability. The Spartans were the ultimate case of optimizing for a known problem. They had one perfect solution for one type of fight. Their perfection was their rigidity.
And he saw that their entire playbook rested on a couple of core assumptions that had gone unchallenged for generations.
2 fatal assumptions. First, they assumed symmetry. Every competent Greek general arranged his forces in a standard, even line, usually 8 to 12 ranks deep all the way across. That was just how you did it. Anything else was seen as amateurish.
Okay, so symmetry was rule number 1. What was the second?
The second, and the most critical, was that they assumed the enemy would dedicate their entire strategy to trying to stop the right flank hammer blow. Every defense they had ever faced was fundamentally reactionary. It was designed to counter that one move.
And Epaminondas.
Epaminondas decided to violate both assumptions at the same time.
Yeah.
He wasn't going to play their game. He was going to completely redefine the context of the fight.
But hang on, a Spartan commander would have scouts, right? When they saw this bizarre, lopsided Theban formation, shouldn't that have set off alarm bells? Shouldn't they have thought, wait, something's wrong here?
You'd think so.
Oh.
But that's where cultural bias or maybe arrogance comes in. When the Spartans saw Epaminondas' formation, they didn't see innovation. They saw incompetence.
They thought he'd made a mistake.
They saw it as a sign of fear and poor generalship. They looked at the asymmetry and likely thought, these people don't even know how to set a proper line. They're breaking the fundamental rules of warfare. Their contempt and 3 centuries of guaranteed victory blinded them to the possibility that the rules were being broken on purpose.
Okay, so Epaminondas reveals this plan. It must have sounded like pure insanity to his officers. His first radical move is what tacticians now call the refused right flank.
It was an act of incredible psychological courage. It required absolute trust from his men. He took his own right flank, the weakest part of his army, and stripped it down to a skeleton force.
And he didn't just tell them to hold the line.
No, he gave them a much stranger order. He ordered them to refuse battle. That meant, as the armies advanced, his right flank was instructed to pull back slowly in a gradual oblique retreat.
They were deliberately giving ground.
Deliberately. They were creating empty space. Epaminondas was weaponizing his own weakness. He was giving the Spartan king, Cleombrotus, exactly what he expected to see, an easy overlap against the enemy's flank. But the flank he was overlapping was deliberately worthless. He was luring the Spartan elite forward into empty space, drawing them away from the rest of their army.
He was isolating them.
He was drawing the punch away from the real fight. It was a brilliant piece of battlefield geometry.
And the reason he could afford to sacrifice that whole side of the field was because he was throwing every single one of his good troops into the other side. This is the human battering ram, the truly radical move.
This is where his philosophical insight meets brutal, simple physics. He took every elite unit he had, all the best Theban and Boeotian veterans, and instead of spreading them out, he stacked them up.
And not just a little deeper.
No, not 16 ranks, not 20. He formed a massive column, 50 ranks deep.
50! I can't even picture that. That's 4 times deeper than any conventional formation. You're giving up all your width, all your flexibility.
You are. It violates every single established rule of Greek warfare. The whole point of the phalanx was the long, wide line to maximize your spear points facing the enemy. Epaminondas sacrificed all of that for one single purpose: concentrated, overwhelming physical mass.
He wasn't trying to outfight them. He was trying to literally push them over.
He was trying to brute force them. And the truly shocking part, he didn't aim this battering ram at a weak spot in the Spartan line, which would have been the logical thing to do.
Where did he aim it?
Directly at King Cleombrotus and the Spartan royal guard, the strongest, most elite point of the entire Spartan army.
He's attacking strength with manufactured, localized strength.
That's the genius of it. He knew a conventional symmetrical fight favored the superior quality of the Spartans. But he calculated that if he could apply 50 units of pushing force against their 12 units of defense, the sheer volume of mass would negate their individual skill. It was a test of material science, with human bodies as the material.
And leading this 50-deep column, the very tip of the spear, was one of the most unique and fascinating military units in all of history, the Sacred Band of Thebes.
300 men organized as 150 pairs of male lovers.
And this wasn't just a social statement. This was cold, hard military psychology.
It absolutely was. The Thebans recognized that conventional discipline, the kind the Spartans had perfected, still has a ceiling. A soldier, when faced with overwhelming terror or pain, might break and run to save his own life.
But the psychology of the Sacred Band was different. Their loyalty wasn't to an abstract idea of the state. It was to the man fighting right next to them.
Precisely. The military logic was that a man will fight with more desperation, with more fury, not for honor, but to protect the life of the person he loves most. The bond ensured they would not retreat a single step if it meant abandoning their partner. The sources say they operated as 150 perfect micro-units, anticipating each other's moves, covering each other's weaknesses, fighting with a fury born of intimate knowledge and a deep, terrifying fear of personal loss.
So you have this collision of two psychologies. The Spartan machine, driven by discipline, and the fear of shame.
Running headfirst into the Sacred Band, driven by the profound, primal fear of personal loss. It's desperation versus discipline.
And that desperation focused into a 50-deep column. That was the entire gamble.
The whole battle hinged on it. If that column pierced the Spartan elite, the entire Spartan psychological structure would shatter. If it failed, the rest of the Theban line, already weakened and pulling back, would be enveloped and destroyed. The fate of Thebes rested on the simple, brutal physics of that initial impact.
Okay, so the lines are advancing, the armies are moving toward each other. What's going through King Cleombrotus' head on the Spartan side when he sees this strange, crooked Theban line for the first time?
I think our sources point to one overwhelming feeling. Contempt. Just profound contempt. He sees this bizarre formation, the retreating right flank, this huge, clumsy-looking block on the left. To a Spartan commander, it validates every cultural assumption he has.
He thinks they're amateurs.
He thinks they're terrified. He sees the refused flank not as a tactic, but as the beginning of a general retreat. He's dismissive, he believes the victory is already guaranteed, and it's just a matter of going through the motions. He orders his royal guard to advance directly on that deep Theban column, confident that their superior skill and speed will just carve through it.
So the Spartan advance begins. You can imagine it. Perfect discipline, measured steps, maybe the sound of the pipes playing that eerie war music that had meant victory for centuries.
And the royal guard slams into the Theban left, and this is the moment where physics completely defies 300 years of history.
What happens in that collision? How does a line of the world's greatest warriors, braced for impact, just buckle?
It all comes down to that push ratio we talked about. The Spartan warrior in the front rank, he's got maybe 12 men behind him, all pushing in perfect unison. He's the tip of a very sharp, very disciplined spear.
But the Theban in front of him.
The Theban in front of him, one of the sacred band, has 50 men pushing behind him. It's not a spear, it's a battering ram. You can be the strongest, most disciplined man in the world, but your shield arm has physical limits. Your feet can only get so much traction on the dusty ground.
They were just physically overwhelmed.
The sources suggest they were literally crushed backward. It wasn't a fair fight of skill against skill anymore. It was a demonstration of a physical law. The men in the front ranks couldn't even fall back properly because they were being pressed against their own comrades behind them. They were being suffocated, losing their balance, and physically driven back by a mass that their bodies could not possibly resist.
The iron wall was flexing. It was breaking.
And while this incredible pressure is being applied by the main column, the sacred band at the very front are doing their specialized work. They're not just pushing. They're fighting with that desperate fury, working in their pairs, finding tiny gaps, and relentlessly, ruthlessly driving toward the center of the royal guard.
Towards the king.
Towards the king. And then the unthinkable happens. A spear point finds its way through. King Cleombrotus goes down.
The king is down.
The king is down. And the shock of that moment, it must have been instantaneous and paralyzing.
Yeah.
This wasn't just a general being wounded. This was, as you said earlier, a cosmic violation. Spartan kings were descendants of Heracles. They were semi-divine. Their presence on the battlefield was the guarantee of stability and divine favor.
So when he fell?
The entire psychological certainty of the royal guard just dissolved. It was the crack in the foundation of their entire worldview.
And what happens next, while it's probably heroic in Spartan terms, is a complete tactical disaster.
It's tactical suicide. The surviving royal guard, they stop fighting the battle. They go into a frenzy to recover the king's body.
Why was that so important?
The thought of the king's body falling into enemy hands, being desecrated, it was a shame worse than their own annihilation. So the best, most experienced warriors left in the entire Spartan army, they stop trying to hold the line, and they start this furious, localized skirmish to pull a corpse back through the ranks.
They're dying by the dozens.
For a dead man, while the battle is still raging around them.
And while this is happening, this spectacle of the invincible elite being slaughtered over a body, what is the rest of the Spartan army doing? We're talking about the thousands of Perioikoi and allied troops.
And this is the key structural flaw that Epaminondas blew wide open. The Perioikoi, the free non-citizens, and the allies from the Peloponnesian League, they didn't fight with the fanatical death or glory mindset of the Spartiates.
They were there out of obligation.
Out of fear? And because they believed in the certainty of a Spartan victory, they were, in a sense, political conscripts. And from their position in the center and on the left, they watched the king fall. They watched the elite royal guard, the bedrock of the Spartan military myth, get chewed up and destroyed over a dead body.
They did the math, as you said.
They absolutely did the math. Their entire motivation was based on the invincibility of the Spartans. And that invincibility just evaporated before their eyes. If the god's own general and the world's best troops could be broken by this weird, lopsided Theban line, why should they stick around and die?
So their flight wasn't cowardice. It was rational self-preservation.
Completely rational. And the collapse was immediate and total. The Spartan center and left, which hadn't even really engaged the enemy yet, just dissolved. They threw away their shields, the ultimate symbol of disgrace, and they ran.
And the rout became a massacre.
A total massacre. The Spartan right flank, the one Epaminondas had lured into empty space, was now isolated, unsupported, and completely irrelevant. The whole system just disintegrated from the inside out. And the few remaining Spartiates who hadn't died around the king, maybe 300 of them, suddenly found themselves alone and surrounded.
So we come to the immediate aftermath on the field. And this is where the battle stops being just a battle and becomes a civilizational crisis for Sparta. 400 full citizens, 400 Spartiates are dead. Another 300 are surrounded. We have to really underline what a demographic catastrophe this was.
It was an extinction-level event for their ruling class. The number of full citizens, the homoioi, had been shrinking for generations because of their strict land laws and citizenship rules. At their peak, they might have had 8,000 or 9,000. By 371 BC, that number was probably closer to 1,500.
So losing 400 in one afternoon.
It's more than a quarter of their entire military-age citizen body, gone, in an hour. It's a wound they can never, ever recover from.
And the commander of the surviving 300, a man named Danon, he faces this impossible choice. A choice that violates everything the Agoge ever taught him.
The code is simple. Victory or death. If they stand and fight for honor, they'll die as martyrs. But Sparta, as a military power, will functionally cease to exist that day. There won't be enough of them left to field an army.
So he chooses what he must see as the shame of survival. He requests a truce to recover the dead.
And that single act is the formal, unambiguous admission of total, unconditional defeat. It sends a shockwave across Greece.
But what Epaminondas does next? This is the true masterstroke. This is psychological warfare at its most brilliant. He could have finished them off.
He could have. He could have created an epic last stand, a story Sparta could use for propaganda, for vengeance, but instead, he grants the truce.
He refuses to create martyrs.
He denies them the comfort of a glorious defeat, but he doesn't stop there. He uses the recovery of the bodies as a tool of public humiliation. He forces the surviving Spartiates to gather their dead under the watchful eyes of the victorious Thebans and, crucially, all the allied contingents. And then he conducts what can only be described as a public audit. He orders that the bodies be collected in separate groups, the allies in one pile and the Spartiates in another.
And that separation was devastating, wasn't it? Because Sparta always hid its own citizen losses.
Always. They'd inflate the casualty numbers of their allies and downplay their own to preserve the myth that the homoioi were somehow invulnerable. And now Epaminondas forces them, in front of all of Greece, to put their 400 dead super soldiers on public display. It was a statistical, undeniable demonstration that the myth was dead. The reputation, which was their greatest force multiplier, was gone forever.
And then the news gets back to Sparta.
Yeah.
And the timing is just brutally ironic. It arrives during the Gymnopedia festival.
A massive public festival dedicated to celebrating physical perfection, military excellence, and Spartan endurance. The city is in the middle of its most joyous, most self-congratulatory celebration of its core identity.
And the ephors, the 5 elected magistrates who really held the power in Sparta, they get the news.
They get the news, and they immediately understand the danger, not just of grief, but of panic. If this news hits the public all at once, the entire social structure, which is built on the bedrock assumption of invincibility, could just implode.
So they make this cold, terrifying decision. The festival must continue. No public announcement. No general mourning.
It's a totalitarian measure to maintain control. They send private messages to the families of the fallen, and they give them an order. You are to show joy. You are to show profound pride in public.
Joy.
Joy. Because death in battle was the highest honor a Spartan could achieve. Any sign of public mourning would imply that this was a tragedy, not a fulfillment of their purpose.
So you have this dystopia playing out in the streets. The mothers and wives of the dead men are forced to plaster on smiles, to act proud while locking their grief away.
But the families of the survivors wept openly in the streets.
Because survival was infinitely worse than death.
Infinitely worse. The survivors, those 300 men who chose life, they returned home to be branded traitontes, the tremblers, cowards. Under Spartan law, they lost their citizenship. They became untouchables. They couldn't hold office. They couldn't marry. They were shunned in the marketplace. It was a social death.
But here's the paradox that just exposes the flaw in this rigid system.
The ultimate paradox. If you apply the law, you have to brand 300 experienced, battle-hardened warriors as social outcasts. That is nearly half of your remaining military force.
You need those men.
Desperately.
Yeah.
Sparta's on the verge of collapse. Thebes is still a threat. You need every hoplite you can get. So the iron rigidity of their sacred law demands that the tremblers be disgraced. But the pragmatic, immediate need for survival demands these men fight. Applying the law is national suicide. But ignoring the law means shattering the religious and legal foundation of your entire state.
It's an impossible problem, which forces the intervention of the other king, Agesilaus.
And his solution, it's brilliant in his own way, but it's so revealing. He can't just change the law, because that would be admitting the law was flawed. So he comes up with a legal fiction.
What does he say?
He stands before the assembly and says, let the laws sleep for a day.
Sleep for a day.
Just for a day. The law wasn't overturned. The shame wasn't pardoned. The entire legal structure was just temporarily suspended for convenience. So the survivors could fight again.
And that act, it saves Sparta in the short term, but it cracks the whole ideology.
It shatters it. It proves that their sacred, unchanging code, their rhetra, was actually subservient to political need. The moment Sparta admitted its laws could be bent for convenience, its claim to unique, disciplined perfection just eroded from within. The internal collapse of faith in the system was permanent.
But Epaminondas isn't done. He's shattered the army. He's exposed the social flaw.
Oh.
His final moves are designed to make sure Sparta can never, ever recover.
He does the unthinkable. He invades Laconia.
He marches an army into the Spartan homeland. For centuries, that territory was considered inviolable. Not because of walls. Sparta famously scorned walls as a sign of cowardice, but because of the sheer terror of the Spartan army.
Attacking Laconia was considered suicidal. But now their army is broken and their reputation is worthless. Epaminondas marches his army through the countryside, burning and plundering, while the great city that had dictated terms to all of Greece could only watch helplessly from behind hastily built barricades.
The psychological blow must have been immense, but the truly permanent damage, the master stroke, came next.
The liberation of Messenia.
This was the foundation of everything.
Everything. Messenia was the economic engine of the Spartan state. The Messenians were the helots, the state-owned slaves who worked the land. Remember, a full Spartan citizen, a homios, was legally forbidden from farming or engaging in any kind of commerce.
Their whole lives were dedicated to the agauge and warfare.
And that was only possible because of the vast agricultural surplus produced by the forced labor of the helots.
What was the ratio? How dependent were they?
Our sources estimate it was at least 7 helots for every 1 Spartiate. By liberating Messenia, Epaminondas didn't just take away some territory. He permanently cut the fuel supply for the perfect warrior machine.
And he didn't just free them.
No, he was smarter than that. He actively helped the newly freed Messenians build a heavily fortified capital city, Messene, right on Sparta's border. This made the liberation irreversible. And suddenly, the remaining Spartan citizens had to worry about agriculture, about feeding themselves. They could no longer afford to be full-time warriors.
So it was an economic collapse that led to a military collapse.
It was the extinction event for the Spartan model. The perfect warrior machine was fundamentally incompatible with the economic reality of having to work for a living. The number of full citizens continued to plummet. Within a few decades, Sparta was so irrelevant that when Philip of Macedon, Alexander the Great's father, was conquering Greece, he supposedly sent them a message. If I invade Laconia, I will destroy you.
And the famous Spartan reply.
Just one word. If. But the telling part is that Philip didn't even bother. They weren't even a target worthy of his attention anymore. That's how far and how fast they fell.
Incredible. Leuctra wasn't just a battle. It was the trigger for a complete system self-destruction engineered by one man who saw the flaw.
And that's the ultimate lesson from Leuctra. It's a cautionary tale that invincibility is always an illusion. Sparta was destroyed by the very things that made it so dominant. Its absolute perfection in one narrow context and its subsequent rigidity, its refusal to innovate.
They became so hyper-optimized for the traditional hoplite phalanx fight that they lost the ability to even imagine that war could be waged any other way.
They assumed the enemy would always fight symmetrically. They assumed the right flank hammer blow was an unstoppable law of nature. They assumed their discipline made them inherently superior, man for man, and all of those things were true.
Until someone simply questioned the framework those assumptions were built on.
Epaminondas didn't try to stop the drift or counter the hammer blow head-on. He accepted them as facts of life, and then he just used them as variables in a completely new equation. He changed the geometry of the fight. He countered Spartan quality with overwhelming manufactured mass focused on one precise point. And by violating those unchallenged assumptions, he found the catastrophic flaw in the perfect shield.
And this pattern, it just repeats throughout history, doesn't it? The heavily armored, disciplined European knight, optimized for the head-on charge, is completely undone by the fluid, nomadic archery of the Mongols, who simply refuse to fight a pitched battle.
Or the static, linear trench defenses of World War I, which were considered impregnable, being shattered by the speed and decentralized command of the Blitzkrieg in World War II. In every case, the dominant power is undone when the very rules they perfected are suddenly changed by their opponent.
The more perfectly optimized a system is for one context, the more brittle it becomes when that context changes.
Sparta couldn't imagine a world where 50 men could push harder than 12. Their entire culture rested on that certainty. And when that certainty was physically broken on the field, the entire economic and social scaffolding that they had built to support that one idea, it just crumbled overnight.
So we have to look around today at the systems we operate in. We all have our own invincible systems that we rely on, the unbeatable business models, the dominant technologies, the political doctrines that seem completely unchallengeable. And we have to ask ourselves, what are the foundational assumptions that underpin all of that?
What are the things we believe to be so true that we don't even question them anymore?
Because the critical lesson from Leuctra isn't about spears and shields. It's about the danger of over-optimization. If your system is too perfect, too successful, and too rigid, it is just waiting for the Epaminondas of your era to show up and exploit the weakness that you can't even see. The greatest danger isn't the competitor who's bigger or stronger than you. It's the one who thinks differently enough to change the entire field of play. What is the equivalent of your Messenia? What's the foundational resource that, if it were removed, would permanently cut the fuel supply to your machine? That's the vulnerability we all need to be searching for.